Teresa and Mike, the organizers, most of all, each of you for attending. Great to see you here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for making time for this. Teresa said that Mike's enthusiasm, she could have said this could be said of her equally, is contagious. I'm assuming that you're already infected and that you're already carriers of the spirit that animates this meeting, and I hope every day of your service as trustees. Teresa said that in Indiana the trustees lead. I assume everyone here knows the implication of what she said, what she left unsaid. We don't have some superstructure here of a chancellor system or something in which every university is exists at the discretion of some higher authority. You're in charge, you and the presidents who work and administrations who work with you, and that's why it's such a, to me, self-evidently smart idea to have this meeting, to have something like it on a regular basis. So thanks for seeing it that way. Thanks for making time in your busy schedules. Let me say some obvious things, and then if you want to talk about things less obvious, there'll be time for questions. But sometimes the restatement of the obvious is useful. Higher education never been so important to the health and well-being and the future of our state as it is right now. Our work for close to 6 years has been, one way or another, all about trying to improve the long-term prospects for upward mobility for Hoosiers, for economic prosperity, for the sort of economic success from which all other good things, including funding for worthy purposes like higher ed, must ultimately come. And viewed as dispassionately as I can, I think we've made a lot of headway. Less fortunate audiences would be subjected to my barrage of slides and maps and things. Some of you have been victimized, I know. And I think we can pretty well demonstrate in Indiana these days that in many respects we have risen to a position of some leadership in terms of the qualities that make a place on this globe attractive to investors and risk takers and the people who hire other folks and try to organize them in a way that leads to greater wealth for everybody. So, low taxes and low costs and predictable regulation and a reasonable legal system and great infrastructure and on and on and on. It's been increasingly of concern to me that the one box we have yet to check, the one that could ultimately, if we don't address it successfully, hold us back as a state, is the educational attainment of our working age citizens. And I know you know the statistics, at least in general, that whereas we're, depending on the measure, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from the top in some of these other categories, we are 5th from the bottom in the educational attainment of adult Hoosiers right now. That at least in terms of 4-year degrees. And it doesn't look really much better if you broaden the definition to post-secondary credentials of one kind or another. Only some 20-some% of our citizens with a bachelor's degree or more. The system that we have, if it's even fair to call it a system, is in need of change. And I say this with a smile to the administrators in the room. Trustees are going to have to help lead it. You're going to have to at least demand it. You may not have, we don't want you micromanaging. You may not prescribe the exact nature of the change, but you're going to have to do, if we're going to make the kind of improvement we need to in the time available to us, you're going to have to press for it and measure it and demand results. Now, the threats there are threats, meanwhile, to higher education writ large in America. And these problems, by the way, may be more severe by degree here, but they're not unique. And I don't know of a state that can claim not to be troubled by them. people, very learned people, have written some pretty interesting articles in recent years analogizing our current system of higher education to the newspaper industry, for instance. It cruised along, apparently permanent, apparently impervious, and then suddenly is in mortal danger of being run right out of business. And there are some real parallels. No matter how often I hear it, it still draws me up short when Teresa or somebody reminds me that only 1 in 7 or something of all those attending higher education institutions today are what we thought of as traditional, attending a 4-year school in residence. Is that about right? 15% or some such number. It's a completely different world than the one some of us think of, than maybe you think of when you approach your duties. There's a different set of needs, a different set of capabilities to pay for education, and a different set of students out there. Under the Commission's leadership, we've made a couple, I think, of very important changes of direction in the last few years in Indiana. And those of you there's some here who've been serving for quite a while, you'll have lived through this and seen it, and I hope support it. Others of you are newer to your duty, so let me just mention briefly. We seek not some pristine differentiation, but some differentiation of missions among our schools. I guess the simplest way to say it is we want to see in Indiana where there is a place for every student, but not every student can go every place. We do not need a full-service buffet at every Indiana school. And the implications of that are we need fewer of something, fewer departments. And that won't come easily. Although some schools have, to their internal credit, have begun down that path. A second major transformation, and here higher ed's no different than public activities of every other kind I can think of. It's time to start measuring and rewarding output, not input, results. And so the transition, at least in terms of the support from your fellow taxpayers, to supporting graduates, and degrees, and completion, as opposed to simply enrollees, is really important. And maybe I overread it, but my sense is that Indiana here might be a step ahead. I do know this, that when here, as in essentially every state in America, the current recession forced some contraction or moderation of state subsidies, and we did it without thinking very hard about it, through the commission, and the commission and apportioned the reductions through our performance model. It attracted national attention. What? Indiana does this based on how well the schools perform and actually moving people through to some successful completion? But again, unless you've become numb to it, I don't know how you can fail to be stunned and shocked by how big this job is. Again, it doesn't matter how often I look at it. These numbers about the high percentage of our students, young and not so young, who never finish. I mean, never finish. So we have 14 four-year campuses, if I count correctly, in Indiana. The percentage of students completing a bachelor's degree in the 4 years some of us thought was standard, the percentage at which even half do that, or the number, is 1. The number in which even half do that in 6 years is 3. I used to wonder, well, we're getting something for all that time, something for all that money, something for all that student loan burden, aren't we? They were there, even if they didn't finish, something good happened. No, it didn't. More of that I read, the more of the questions I ask about that. As far as I know, no one has proven anything of any lasting value happens to a student who comes and goes in a year or 2 or 3 and never finishes. Teresa tells me there's some data that says may even be a negative value. I know one thing, they left, most of them left with a lot of debt for the little to negligible educational or professional improvement that came with it. And then lastly, efficiency, which I understand to be the focus or a central point of today's meeting. Hallelujah for that. I don't know what this means, and Indiana is not at all an outlier, or if so, only slightly. But across American higher education, administrative costs have been rising very, very rapidly. I've been often heard on the subject of our percent of our K-12 spending that never gets to the classroom, something approaching 40%. It's too darn bad because it's a lopsided way to deliver resources when you realize that it's the students who are and their success that's the whole goal. It's supposed to be the goal of the enterprise. But look, higher ed. There's a report out of Arizona, I guess certainly the most recent, I guess the most definitive that I read recently. In the last 15 years, been a 39% increase in administrators per student in American higher ed. There's been a 61% increase in administrative spending per student in American higher ed. And the ratio of administrators to students is now 1 to 13. I don't know what those folks are doing. I know much, I'm sure a lot of it's very useful. Maybe some of them should be recategorized as something other than administrators. I don't know. But factoring for all that, there's some upside here. There's some improvement possible. And particularly at a time when incomes in our state are stagnant to down for the folks paying the bills, and costs and tuition are up. So the role of the trustee, I think, has never, ever been so critical as it is today. And I just can't thank you enough for embracing it. I want to thank the leadership of our schools, presidents who are here. I don't know a one of them that doesn't want and tell me all the time that, you know, to the extent that I have appointments, which are partial at each school, please send people who want to help us move forward. No one has ever called me up and said, those folks you're sending ask too many questions. They're troublemakers. Can't you just send a lap dog that'll just do what I want them to do? They may be thinking that, but they don't say that. I don't think they're thinking that. And I hope they're not. I hope you're not, you trustees. Some of you have heard this little spiel from me before when I called to say, please serve. I usually say something like, remember, dear old alma mater, if it is your alma mater, the school that you love, they've already got a booster club, a good one. They don't need a second. We want you to be enthusiastic. We want you to love that place. But you're not there to be a mindless cheerleader for whatever is. They've already got lobbyists. I don't want to see at the State House asking for more money. They can make that case for themselves. Please stay back there at the school and work on how to use that money to the maximum educational success of every conceivable student. That's what we're asking you to do. I used to say in speeches early on in this adventure of mine that if we were favored with public employment for a little while, we were going to be all about change. And please, don't anybody send us there if you think things are just fine the way they are, because you'll be disappointed, because that's not the way we see our assignment. And I say all the time that our endeavor was for people who loved this state enough to change it and believed in this state enough to be confident that we could change it for the better. That's the way I hope you see your mission as a trustee, wherever you are. I mean, the upsides are tremendous here. The flip side of everything I just said, and the sort of half-full way I probably should have presented it is, look at the upside. When you're 45th in America in educational attainment, we could make such great growth so quickly. When you got everything else coming into alignment to make this a place of promise and prosperity, if we can get this ever more critical factor of educational and workforce readiness right, the sky's the limit. And so if you want Indiana to be a great place, you're just exactly where you ought to be. And you're where you ought to be in this room, in this academy today. I can't think of a development that would have a bigger payoff for us as a state, if you work it all the way back, than better informed, more open-minded, and change-oriented trustees at our major universities. The leverage on improvement, the improvements that you are making and can make, is just gigantic. And I hope you're excited about it. So, come to this academy, but do some reading outside of class too. Talk to each other. I hope you'll get to know each other if you don't already across the schools today. You're kind of sitting clumped up by school, as I noticed. Somebody ought to mix you up at some point, so you don't just talk inside the same circle you get to visit with on a recurring basis. And press for new ideas, or at least be willing and encouraging when your presidents and your leadership want to try something new. The whole idea, for instance, of trying in different ways, because we have so many different kinds of students, to accelerate the process in which they reach a degree, or in other settings a certificate of some competence, ought to be something we're really open-minded to. Other places are, shoot, forget 6 years, even 4 years. If a student's up to it and wants to do it, can we get them to completion in 3 or some lesser time? What more can we do? Are there any gaps in the continuum of opportunities and offerings that we have to make certain that there's some place that's just right for every student at whatever age, at whatever degree of attainment they already have reached? If there are such gaps, let's make sure somebody, not everybody, somebody steps in and fills them. I'll close with a story that I told, and a few of you were there at the Weldon conference, but it's just too apt. I've been part of I hope a contribution to this. You'll have seen it advertised recently, WGU Indiana. We didn't see across this whole spectrum a place quite like it, aimed mainly at adults who missed what we think of as the traditional opportunity at higher ed, but would still like that 4-year degree, but can no longer come to campus, or very conveniently. So it's online, totally accredited. You may have heard the pitch. And it's so-called competency-based, so the student moves at his or her own rate, and consequently, frequently finishes in much less time at a much lower cost. We think it'll be very, very valuable to some people. In the course of that, I met a director of that university, trustee, I guess. And he's the retired president of Washington State University. And he told me the most amazing story. Going through papers while he was still on the job at WSU, he found correspondence to and from a predecessor of a century ago. The guy's name was Bryan. And amazingly, at that time, there were 3 brothers Bryan, simultaneously presidents of 3 major American universities. I wonder if that's ever happened before or since. So the brothers Bryan were, for a while, presidents of Washington State, MIT, and IU. And this guy found a letter from the IU Bryan to the Washington State Bryan right after he retired. And apparently IU, the community, threw a great big tribute at the time of his stepping out of the job. And in the letter to his brother, he said, "If I'd pushed this place like I should have, the retirement party would have been a lot smaller." And I wrote that down. I thought, now that's a pretty good rule of life. I'm going to try to remember that myself. But it came right out of this setting. And I hope you'll apply it to your roles too. Don't worry about the retirement party. There'll probably be a really good one, especially if you do the right kind of job. But push the place. Push it to be everything it can be. Push it to fit in to a new, I won't say system, I'll just say partnership of institutions that does offer a place somewhere to every student of every kind at every point in life. A system that is aimed at performance, what comes out, not just what comes in. And a place that just emphasizes every day the kind of efficiency in the use of scarce resources that will get for each man or woman that comes through the door, and ultimately for this state of ours collectively, the highest possible return in the way that matters most, the human talent, the human potential of our 6.3 million neighbors. Thanks for being here and for the service that you have, I know, cheerfully embraced. Now, I know there's a rule against these things getting ahead of schedule, but we are, I think, even if I take a few questions. So. And Shane.
Mitch Daniels. Governor, I know everybody is facing a lot of budgetary constraints. Obviously, IPTech has had its share. We have an excellent manager who's helped us through a lot of that. But I still hear, I think, from many of our staff people and some of our regional campuses, we'll just wait until the economy comes back in the state and we see a return to prior funding levels for the state. From your vantage point, what do you see the state budget looking like in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and how should we be preparing strategically for the realities of that environment?
First, I'm relieved if that's what they're saying, as opposed to, we'll wait a couple years till that Daniels guy gets out of there, and then, because I'm not really the problem here. In fact, I think you know that some of you will remember that although it ran afoul of a couple of one legal and one political problem, I was trying at one point to create the greatest infusion of funding into Indiana higher ed that maybe we've ever seen. And I'd love to try that again if I ever see an opening. No, the question is well put. And anyone imagining, by the way, I'd give exactly the same answer if we were discussing a totally different subject or category of government activity right now. Anybody imagining that there will be at least any near-term snap back to what we thought of as normal levels and every year increases, better not count on it. I had my oatmeal this morning with Dr. Marty Feldstein, happened to be coming through town, one of the most eminent economists in America. He, unfortunately, was unable to disabuse me of my own sense of caution and pessimism about the American economy. He sees it exactly the same way. And while we hope to outperform some here in Indiana, there are limits. I mean, like right now we are outperforming, by the way, if you didn't know this. For the first 7 months this year, the #1 state in America in private sector job growth is Indiana. We're growing 4 times the national average. We've added 56,000 new private sector jobs, you know, the ones that pay for government. Put differently, 2% of America's population, we are 9% of all the new jobs. But you can barely tell it. Our unemployment's still up there, and you know, just because people add a job, this economy sooner or later will overcome all the obstacles, but as it does, for instance, people are no longer spending so wildly and freely as they did till a couple, 3 years ago. If you think about it, they couldn't. Nobody's going to loan money the way they used to. Certainly nobody's going to be able to borrow money against paper appreciation in a house and go out and spend it. So what's that mean? 43% of Indiana's tax revenues are sales tax. Better count on slow growth. People are doing what they ought to do. Pay down those credit cards. Moderate your spending. So the most direct answer I can give you, Ann, is that here, as in other people are saying in other contexts, there's probably a new normal. And when I see the possibility of some sharp recovery and consequent recovery in state revenues coming, you'll be the first to know. I'll be on the rooftop celebrating, but I don't see it now, and I think it'd be very, very unwise for people in a position like mine or in like yours and the schools you support to count on it.
Governor, you talked about eliminating redundancies between different universities, look for areas of consolidation, how we can be more efficient as a higher education system in the state of Indiana. You know, if you had a magic wand, what would be some of your thoughts in terms of, you know, anything that comes off the top of your head, specific areas where that, or even a process or approach?
Well, Keith, y'all will have a much better sense than I do. I ask about this when I'm visiting with university leadership. I mean, it's inescapable to me that we should at least be looking at courses, disciplines, departments even, in which there is little or no student participation. At some point you have to ask yourself, should we be in that business, don't you? I became convinced, listening to people in higher ed, that the last thing we'd want to have is a top-down system that says, okay, Purdue, stop that. Right? IU already does that. Ball State, knock that off because Indiana State's got that. I mean, no, that can't be the right answer, I don't think. There has to be multiple options, I suppose, for anything, just not universal options. And there has to be some measure of competition, I think. But again, I'm well aware that some schools have started what I know will be a difficult process of scrutinizing the range of their offerings, trying to decide, what are we really good at here? We should do more of it, probably. What are we, if we're second best in Indiana, that's one thing. What if we're eighth best? And what if very few students are signing up? Is it time to bell the cat on something like that? But I don't have a magic wand, and I don't have a magic answer, Keith.
Jerry, it's just supply a word that was coined long ago inside higher education to describe the approach that she was referring to. It's called the culture of rescue. You expect the right alignment of people in government and state legislature to come along to provide the resources that are needed. The days of rescue, I think, are over. I think everyone is increasingly understanding that. I have a question for the governor about one other responsibility that the universities may have, along with your speeches over the last several years about being green. That is, people not only have to be well educated in the traditional sense, but they also have to have a spirit of adaptiveness, flexibility, innovation, entrepreneurial spirit, creating their own opportunities in the future and not waiting for, in some sense, a culture of rescue in the economy.
Yes, thank you, Jerry. Jerry's probably thinking how good it was to be a president and chancellor back when the culture of rescue was still intact. Timing's everything. Yes, well, first of all, I would, back to the obvious here, but if there's been a single dominant theme to our time in public service, it has been that we want Indiana to become a place that not only accepts, or as they like to say, embraces, but leads change, and I think that started to happen in many realms. And to me, there's no more positive contributing factor than a better educated populace. The new ideas, the openness to the world that a student, that a person is likely to absorb on your campuses or through the courses you offer is very conducive to that, I think. And so I hope it certainly is that same mentality is part of the way our schools are run and the way their trustees approach their duties. Jerry's question, however, moves me to point out something else to you that I learned in this job. I learn a lot. I have learned, I'm sorry to tell you, that at least when the question comes to the prioritization of state resources, our fellow citizens don't have higher ed very high. Now, I try to explain it to them, and I'm trying to lift it in their estimation. But it's just a fact of life right now. This is something else you guys can help with a lot. But in a prolonged period of tight scarcity, which I think we're in for, at least for a few more years, please do not imagine that what's obvious to us, what's clear to you, this incredible value that your schools bring and can bring to the state is equally obvious to all our fellow citizens, or notably those who represent them in the state General Assembly. Many of whom are really hot for, a new building there in the town they represent, but they're not particularly interested in whether higher ed advances generally in the state or at all the schools that aren't anywhere close to their district. That's just my reading from having banged around in this issue and advocated some what I thought were pretty enlightened pro higher ed policies before. So no, there probably won't be any rescue. But look at it this way: you're the rescue committee. You can be the rescue committee at your schools. I mean, again, it's probably worse and more pronounced in K-12, but with 40 cents of the K-12 dollar not getting to the classroom, every school board in this state has a tremendous opportunity to do more for instruction and number of teachers and teacher pay. You just got to get serious about the way the rest of the money's being spent. You must have some parallel opportunities.
Governor, you talked about the discussions you and Teresa have had about graduation rates and completion rates. And one of the challenges we have at Ivy Tech is the role that the college has in workforce development and work skills development and trying to balance that versus degree completion. And can you comment on your perspective of Ivy Tech's kind of dual role in academics and workforce development? And you view Ivy Tech's completion rate or degree rate as important as you do that at the normal four-year schools in the state?
That's a great question. And I don't have a totally confident answer, except to say that looks clear to me and appropriate that Ivy Tech has a lower completion rate than other schools. You're in a different realm as far as I see it. Now, yours is down around in the teens or 20 across most of the schools. It needs to come up. I mean, everybody's need, I hope, will come up through some combination of changes and reforms you bring, but it may always, and probably will always, look very, very different there. And we had a great session with Tom and his team, Teresa and Mike, the other day, looking at ways that the Ivy Tech might accelerate people to at least to a career certificate level, which may be exactly the right thing. As a subject for it's a sermon for a different Sunday, but I think a lot of things I've read lately have opened my eyes to the fact that we want to think more broadly than just about the 4-year degree, which we've emphasized a lot, and it's very important. That's the thing we're 45th on. But it won't be the right or best answer for hundreds of thousands of our people whose best pathway to that life of upward mobility we seek may be an alternative route, might be Ivy Tech or some, as we'd say, non-traditional mode. So no, your completion rates may always look different, and what it is people complete probably will look very different, and that's a good thing.
Governor, I wonder if I could turn the question around just a little bit. I completely agree with you, applaud your desire to see us scrutinise more carefully what we are doing internally in terms of our offerings, and to be both looking for what it is maybe time to get rid of, and at the same time what other new opportunities out there we should be taking advantage of. That's absolutely right. On the other hand, I'm struck by the fact that our processes internally are somewhat slow and convoluted sometimes. But once we get things done, the next level that we have to, outside the university, we have to deal with, can also be sometimes slow and convoluted, whether it be courses, schools, infrastructure. What can you do to help us at that level? Once we actually get to being able to come up with the new creative ideas for schools, for infrastructure, and so on. What can you do to help us there? I'm struck by the fact that you and I have been to China, and in what is meant to be a sort of ossified, centrally planned system, I'm struck with the speed with which my colleagues over there can get things improved compared to the speed at which I can get.
Yeah. I love the way Michael started the question. Sometimes it helps turn the question around. I've been in my little slideshow that you were spared today. I stuck a New Yorker cartoon at the front end. The guy sitting in the forlorn guy sitting in the doctor's office. The doctor says, "Sometimes it helps to turn a question around. Why not you?" I usually tell the audience, in case you didn't recognize, that's the governor of Illinois sitting there in that picture. But it could have been the president of a modern university, because you must feel that way once in a while. And no, I mean, I think that is a great question, and it's a really good challenge to us. And you ought to talk about that here, and then tell us. I'd like to know what barriers are there. I'd like to have a few. I can think of a couple, but I'd probably miss a lot of examples where something that was a new or good idea just took too darn long. And something that we could have done. And this is something the commission ought to come back and push us on, to the extent we're the fix, or maybe you're the fix. Maybe you have approvals that maybe you're dallying on. This is real important. One of my little catchphrases that repeated to the point of tedium, I know, is that to our people is we want to move at the speed of business, not the speed of government. Well, this should absolutely apply to the business of higher ed. As far as I'm concerned, if one of your institutions ready to try something that might move us forward, we ought to be right behind that. We ought to be taking barriers out of your way and speeding, whatever that means, any permissions that you need, so we can find out if it works. It might just turn out to be a great idea, in which case other people should be doing the same thing. So I would love to, one of the outputs of this meeting, be a little punch list. There may be, I'm sure there are, obstacles and processes that have been put there over time that I don't even know about. That once we hear about them, we might say, that's nuts, let's do that in a week, not whatever it's taken now.
Morning, Governor.
Morning. I'm fine.
Yeah, Governor, you talked quite eloquently about efficiency and productivity, and clearly all of us are discussing that. There's another side of this thing too, and that gets over into the side of excellence relative to the appeal of existing students in the state of Indiana, the one state in the state, which in many cases comes down to also a financial commitment on the upfront side, whether it be scholarships or other things. Wanted to know, just Governor, your thoughts around that side of how we retain the students that are here, specifically those that are the best students, because that increases that excellence.
Yes.
The other side of that too is as that excellence increases, thoughts about out-of-state students which also can support the revenue base. So it's a fine balance here, but be interested in your thoughts on it.
Yes, sir. Well, the first thing is that all balance of trade calculations have to be made all in. And a lot of people, and I've certainly been one, have lamented the fact that a lot of our best and brightest young people leave the state. Now, by the way, I never thought it was a problem if they wanted to go elsewhere for education. I always thought the goal ought to be that they, if they want to, are confident they can build a good life here, bring that education back. But, you know, I think one of the great positives, I mean, I love to brag on you as a collectivity of institutions. We're very fortunate here. We fight above our weight class. If you look at the size of our state, and yet the number and the variety of institutions we have, public and private, by the way, it's a big plus, and it brings a lot of people here. And I'm meeting an awful lot of students who have come here because they were attracted by the excellence of Purdue or IU or ISU or somewhere. And, you know, we all run into the stories of the young person who left, but I run into a lot of stories of the young people who came and stayed. And so first thing to say is that I always tell people, I get excited when I run into such a person. I always say nothing better ever happens to this state than when imported talent comes here. And you are performing that role, whether you recognize it or not, all the time. I do believe that it is essential that we raise the standards. And I support completely what has been going on across these institutions to raise the standards. Part of success here, again, we want a place for everyone, but part of success, I believe, has got to be that the world looks at Purdue, the world looks at IU as in the very top tier. And that talent from all over the world wants to come there to study or teach, and that everybody else moves up underneath them. We will still we must make it our business to have an appropriate place for in fact, for more young Hoosiers. But for my money, we got to lose the idea that if you can stagger out of an Indiana high school, you're entitled to go to West Lafayette. I think that's gone by the boards now, but, you know, I'm being a little more blunt than I probably should be. But that just, you know, that can't fly. I mean, for one thing, I use the word stagger advisedly. 20-some% of the kids coming out of our K-12 system can't even read and do basic math. They had to be remediated somewhere. So, I mean, clearly that model, if it ever was valid, isn't anymore. And meanwhile, to me, it is a great positive when a student from somewhere else, as they are in increasing numbers, if I'm keeping up with the data, Michael, aren't your out-of-state enrollment, or applications anyway, climbing very fast?
Out-of-state, small state, in-state is
Yeah.
this year.
And to me, that is a signal of success, not a problem that we have to worry about. And it really isn't about the money. Yeah, I like that out-of-state tuition, of course, because I know it makes your job a little easier. But it's more about the talent that comes here and enriches the place while it's here. And I believe, if we do everything else right in the future, is going to stay here in greater percentages and join or start companies and other endeavors that will make Indiana a greater place. Is that responsive to your question? Maybe this is the last one. Sensitive to keeping you on time.
Good morning, Governor. I wanted to address your goal of raising us from the 45th state, and clearly for us to do that, the changing demographics, some of the worst attainment rates, in fact the lowest, are the students of color, first-generation students, those that are facing tremendous challenges, obviously, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how we could raise those attainment rates in order to graduate the 21st century student.
Well, yeah, I can't say it starts at K-12 because it starts in a place even more fundamental than that. And That's the home and community. But I would not lay this at the door at all of our institutions of higher ed. I see you guys doing all sorts of things and making extraordinary efforts to find, recruit, attract, and I know assist to completion students from historically underserved communities, and that's a good thing. That's a great thing. But you cannot do this. You can't do this yourself. You're dealing with a limited pool. I mean, I just look at the frantic competition for the student from a minority group who's really an all-star. Every school in America wants them. And I mean, you just can only do what you can do. But thank you for doing it. We will continue everywhere we know how, and I hope we will make a very large push forward. I mean, I've been having meetings 2 and 3 times a year with university presidents, and they've been enormously helpful to my understanding. So we'll continue them right on out the end. And but it comes up over and over again. We need a better talent pool from which to choose from to continue raising our percentages of graduates from these different categories. And I hope that next year will be characterized by a huge surge of reform in Indiana K-12, including decisive action on schools which have failed and failed and failed and failed and failed in the communities most vulnerable in our state. It won't be an overnight thing, even if we achieve the reforms, but this is where we have to, where state government, I think, can help you. I have every confidence. You know, we've stressed the areas for improvement here, but look, you guys are doing so many wonderful things now. We're so incredibly proud of, as I hope I made plain, of individual and collective achievements, and this is one. As far as I can tell, you're doing as good a job as anybody. Once a young student from a low-income background or from a different some ethnic background that's been underrepresented gets to your place. Others of us have got to do a better job in getting more of them to your front door. Appreciate your coming back to school today. I know the schools of Indiana will be a lot better because you did. Thank you very much.